Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Omar Khalid. But today is the 30th of November 2023, the last day of the 11th month of this year. But a lot of developments are occurring on different fronts, and this is what our show is here for, to discuss those developments from different perspectives. Our first topic this day is the COP28, which has begun. Countries at the climate summit that is happening in the UAE hope to clinch an early deal on this new climate fund to pay for the climate caused damage, aiming to muster some kind of political goodwill before these talks turn into divisive topics that include the future of fossil fuels, because this is one of the more questions that a lot of countries are not coming to a solution. Pakistan has been hoping to find an early solution. We all remember the historic loss and damage fund that had been adopted last year at the COP27 because of Pakistan's work and because of Pakistan's involvement in COP27. Now this year also our caretaker Prime Minister Mahrukh is in Dubai to help the Pakistan delegation at this conference, and hopes to find an early solution to crises that have hit developing countries such as Pakistan. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns Indian state terrorism. We've been highlighting that many a times, but now it's not us, it's the West and the Western media that has been highlighting it. Now the US says it has fallen an alleged plot to assassinate an American citizen in New York who advocated for a Sikh separatist state. Nikhil Gupta, an Indian national, is accused of trying to hire a hitman for $100,000 in cash, but in fact the hitman was an undercover federal agent. This was what prosecutors said during the course of the development. The charges for this person who has been convicted could be of up to 20 years. He is allegedly directed by an Indian government official who was not named or charged in the indictment. The White House says it has raised the alleged assassination plot with India at the most senior levels, and officials there, as per what the US officials have said, responded with surprise and concern. Huge question mark there. This is going to be our second story. Our third story concerns the truce that of course concerns Gaza and the conflict that has been going on since the 7th of October between Israel and Palestine. This truce has now further been extended for a period of 24 hours. What happens once the truce ends? Will there be an extension of the truce? Will there be some kind of positive development as to a ceasefire, a possible ceasefire that could happen, or to make things even better, a two-state solution that could be implemented, or the beginning of talks for that? Will negotiations happen? Is Israel ready to have these talks? A lot of question marks emanate there as well, and we will highlight that in our third story. Then we are going to talk about of course the death of Henry Kissinger. The former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has passed away at the age of 100. He was a former US Secretary of State and National Security Advisor who had escaped Nazi Germany in his youth to become one of the most influential and controversial foreign policy figures in American history. He was, of course, as I said, 100 years of age, and of course his name stands as far as the US foreign policy is concerned. Finally, we'll be talking about 6 exoplanets who have been spotted in a perfectly synchronized dance around a nearby star that offer clues about the formation of our very own solar system, because a lot of theories about that as well. This was said by a group of astronomers yesterday. These exoplanets have been spotted, and of course they offer clues about the formation of our own solar system. These are orbiting the bright star HD 110067 around 100 light years away from the Earth. This is going to be our last story. So let's begin without further ado with our first segment, and that concerns the COP28, the COP or this series of meetings that is held once every year to highlight the issues caused by climate change and what needs to be done by the world community as a whole. We've been joined in the studios by Kamran Naeem. He's a water and climate change specialist with UNICEF. Thank you very much, Kamran, to have joined us. Kamran, we've got lots to discuss, and I think, if I'll go very quickly, because if we were to discuss as much as possible, we could even take the whole show. The COP28 is going to take place in the backdrop of devastating floods and heat waves. We all remember what happened in Pakistan last year as well. Fierce wildfires, Australia, for example, the Earth's hottest summer on record this year. What are the expectations from COP28?
Thank you very much for inviting me to show. And there are a lot of expectations from COP28. And on one side, these climate disasters are not good. But on the other side, these are also good because they are making the climate change visible and people can see it. And those who did not believe in the scientific truth about the climate change, now they can see it. And it's as visible in Pakistan. So a lot of, you can say, in-house advocacy has already happened. The government is well prepared and they are going with the preparation, and we did some good mileage in the last COP27 also, where Pakistan was in the forefront leadership position for the G77 plus China countries, and our minister and the prime minister, I think they did a wonderful job, and we were able to lead the developing countries in creation of the loss and damage fund. And now the expectations are raised because of that also, because you can create funds and you can have pledges, but the real solidification of those pledges happens when you start receiving the climate financing. So I think one of the expectations from COP28 would be that what happened to the loss and damage fund announcements, are there any mechanisms in place? Are those loss and damage fund going to make its way to the developing countries? And are there developed countries ready to actually obligate for the loss and damage fund? So that is one expectation that I also have, and I think there would be a lot of follow-up from Pakistan, and the government has done their preparations, and it's also the climate justice which is being demanded by the developing countries for so many years. So you can say that something is now coming to the main debate, that if you have it as a theory, and then what are the practical steps are going to be taken in this COP28. So the place where it is happening, and when it is happening, and especially Pakistan after a lot of disasters, floods, is in a right position to demand for their rights.
All right, Kamran, a United Nations report says greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have hit a record high last year in 2022. Based on the climate plans of different countries, the report also says that global carbon emissions by 2030 will be cut only by 2% compared to the 2019 levels, despite all the different COPs that have happened since then. Far short of the 43% fall that is needed to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And a lot of reports are also coming that this warming is going to be to increase to 2 or 2.5 degrees Celsius as well, or even 3. Is this achievable this time? These different demands that had been in place since 2019 but haven't happened?
I think you are still very optimistic. Actually, after the report last week, World Met Organization declared that the 2-degree benchmark has already crossed last week. So what to talk about end of the century? So we are already crossing the threshold, and there are different projections which are studied, and from the 4 or 5 projections that I witness and I follow, the debate is between 3 and 3.5 degrees. So it's already a very alarming situation, and there has to be some major steps taken. So one good thing which is going to happen at COP28 in last 15 years, which did not happen, is to look at the decisions that have been made, and to see that if all of those decisions and all of those commitments are met, how much the emissions will be reduced. So I think it's called global stocktake. So the global stocktake is going to actually calculate how much of the commitments which are for emissions reductions and how much of the temperature is going to be reduced, which is not like, I would say that if all of the NDCs are nationally determined commitments made by the developing countries as per the Paris agreements are made, still it will not make a huge difference.
You know, Kamran, you talk of the Paris agreement. I'd like to, it's good that you mentioned the global stockade. How can countries adapt their next climate action plans as per the global stockade, which are due in 2025? I mean, these the next climate change plans. Also, when you talk of the Paris Agreement, is there any seriousness, especially within the global north? You remember that when the Paris Climate Agreement happened, we were all very optimistic that there's going to be finally a solution to the vows of the global south and those countries that are vulnerable. But that never, materialized. Is there any hope of the materialization of the Paris Agreement this time?
I'm hopeful, and I think we are getting into the debates which are going to make the debate on Paris Agreement's implementation more serious this year. So that is the hope with COP28, but I have colleagues who may differ with me.
All right.
And so it's like how you see it. So global stocktake will calculate the emission reduction if all the NDCs, which are mainly because of Paris Agreement, the developing countries had to make some commitments. So that was the obligation on developing countries. But then there are two more things which are going to happen. One is called the global adaptation goal. So the emission reduction through mitigation have been like planned and talked about, but spending on adaptation measures has not been talked about. So the global goal is going to, I think, give us more direction, and that would be the topic in COP28. And the second thing which is also hopeful is that there is going to be a global target for climate financing.
All right.
This is a long-standing issue. There was a commitment that the global north, as they say, but basically these are Annex 1 countries, which include some countries in the south like Australia. So the global north will give $100 billion US dollars to the developing countries to implement NDCs and what measures they want to take.
But isn't there a huge question mark around that as well?
There has been a very huge question mark. Then there was talk that we should fast track the 30% of that funding at least. So with this global financing goal, I think not only there would be a goal to look at, there would be a benchmark to look at, that how much of the financing and when that financing, and there would be a huge pressure on after this on the financing mechanisms which have been very bureaucratic also. So Pakistan has not received a lot of global green climate fund.
Of course, we know that because we were one of the champions at the COP27 with the loss and damage fund that was pushed by Pakistan with such a lot of effort. But what happened? We are at COP28. What are the expectations that were after the COP27, but they were never materialized?
So the whole thing is that after Paris Agreement, there in 5 years after Paris Agreement in 2020, there was no COP. But if COP happened, there was expectations that the implementation mechanisms of the Paris Agreements will be put on table. So because of COVID in 2020, COP didn't happen. But in 2021, when we met in Glasgow, there was a reluctance, and it took very long time to talk about those implementation mechanism, and parties stayed.
Are they priorities because of which there is a reluctance?
It's like, there are national priorities also, and then there are diplomacy around it also. So it's negotiation. So how do you give and take, and how do you move towards smooth transition? So there is a lot of negotiations which happen, and people want to develop. There are countries, there is a debate that the developed countries have the emissions are being counted since the Industrial Revolution in 1750. And those countries which are born in 1947, like Pakistan, so how they can be held accountable for the emissions which are predate their existence. So now there is hope. I think now loss and damage fund and these global goals for adaptation and financing are, I think, going to enter the whole debate into the final stages.
All right.
That now we are really talking about mechanism, and there would be agitation against the slow bureaucratic obligation of these funds to the developing countries, because developing countries are ready with their NDCs now. Pakistan has revised its NDCs in 2021. We have developed now low emission strategies. We have also this year finalized our adaptation plan. So developing countries which are producing, like Pakistan, less than 1% of emissions, they are ready to cut down their emissions more than their share.
But there are so many other countries that emit much more than that, that are not ready to do so.
Yes, so I think there would be now, the debate is going into the ball is going to be in the other court now, and debate is going to be serious, and it would be about the implementation. That's my hope from COP28.
Let's talk of the seriousness of the situation. I'd like to quote two things. Firstly, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who says to the leaders of the G20 nations that they have the power to reset a climate crisis that is spinning out of control. Secondly, you also kind of highlighted the United Nations World Met Organization has said that 3 main greenhouse gases broke records in 2022 and warned there is no end in sight, quote unquote. What preventive measures are required in the short term and in the long term, in your point of view?
So first of all, November 2022 was the hottest November. And yes, the records have broken. And that's what we have to understand from the climate change, that these gases are emitted, but they do not diffuse or vanish away in some time. Some of them will stay there for 350 years. And the whole natural mechanism of the globe is going to, absorb them and neutralize them.
That is why the report says there is no end in sight.
Exactly. So G20 countries are very important in this regard. So most of the Annex 1 countries which I talked about in all the conventions who have this responsibility and obligations, they almost except 1 or 2 G20 countries include Annex 1 countries. So their decisions and mobilizing them through COP process, which has been slow. People do call it that there has been like 28 failures of negotiation, and that's what the mark of COP20 talks about. So there is hope that now there would be now seriousness and the visibility of the climate change and the devastating effect for the children and women. The whole debate of intergeneration equity has come up, that why the next generation are going to pay for the decisions that this generation is making. So it's, I'm from UNICEF, so we talk about children. So it's a child rights crisis, you can say. It's an intergeneration.
It's a complete, any generation's crisis, whether it be the elderly, the women, the men, or the children. All the generations are affected by this, and until and unless the world does not take the necessary steps, this will go on. And if this is not controlled in a couple of years or in less than a decade, we will see devastation caused by climate change. This said, I'd like to understand, Kamran, this is the 28th edition of COP. We've had the Paris Agreement, we've had other COPs. Last year there was a COP. Every year there's a renewed expectation, excitement that something might be done. A lot of pledges are made. All the countries talk heavily about the effects of climate change, how they will gear up, and then it dissipates within the months. What needs to be done as a follow-up mechanism?
I think there is few things which are now in place. Youth is very aware, and youth is getting more and more involved. There is a layout of the youth engagement in the COP process, and I'm very glad to say that there is a youth delegation this time going from the Pakistan to participate, and I'll be coordinating with them also. And we had a whole series of major cities engaging in an event called COP in My City, that all the children cannot go to COP, but we brought COP to them to debate on the topics. So this time Pakistan also had the first local conference of youth, LQI they call it. And then there is a regional conference of youth, and then there is a conference of youth which has just happened at the COP venue. So Pakistan's LQI statement is going to be in the youth statement of which will be presented at COP28. And children are taking over, so they are aware about their climate rights. And one more development which is very new, and I must inform you that in August 2023, environmental rights became part of the Child Rights Convention, CRC. So now all organizations and all people who are working on child rights would include the environmental rights as the child rights. So with children and youth taking over the decisions which are going to affect their lives, I am very hopeful that they will not let it go, and they will not let it dissipate with the conferences and what Greta Thunberg say, that there is a lot of blah 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 at COP.
But she's right, isn't she?
So she is right, and I think they are the one who are going to make these decisions now, and they are going to influence the decision makers and negotiators at COP, that you are taking decisions on our behalf. So are we not involved? Are we not part of those decisions? So I think there is a lot of conscious effort from UNICEF, from a number of partners who have come together, and now youth engagement and children's engagement as part of COP is becoming more and more institutionalized.
I hope that the proper benefits are reaped this time from COP28. Let's come to climate justice. That is the key word, one of the key words as far as climate change or these COPs are concerned. Our caretaker Prime Minister Mahrukh has informed world leaders that Pakistan will seek climate justice and financial support at COP28. And he has also underlined Pakistan's grievances at 2 summit meetings in New York that happened on the sidelines of the 78th United Nations General Assembly. Do you feel Pakistan's voice is listened to? Does the world understand perspectives of countries who've borne the brunt of climate change without any fault of their own? Does the world understand that other countries could also bear the brunt, including themselves, in the coming years if they don't take the necessary steps?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'll congratulate the government of Pakistan for taking the right stance. And second, I think Pakistan voice matters a lot. Pakistan was chair of G77 plus China countries, and that's why our leadership from Pakistan was able to make, and actually consolidate the demands of the developing countries. It's not only Pakistan, all the developing countries have to come together. Pakistan is just the forefront face of the climate disasters which became visible as a result of floods and as a result of repeated heat waves and drought and the floods happening at the same time. So Pakistan's voice, because of the amount of disasters that have taken place and because of its position in the last COP, is very prominent, and I'm sure that it would be heard. And the next chairs and the future chairs of G77 plus China are going to take Pakistan along as the leader of creation of loss and damage funds. So that makes the Pakistan position very prominent. And Pakistan has done a lot also, I would say, irrespective of which government. But I think Pakistan has taken much more than its share in the emissions. And much more than the size of its economy to make a real dent on the emissions and the climate change.
That is true, Kamran. Let's hope that in these coming days, when the COP continues and different world leaders speak, there is a consensus, a broad consensus of moving forward together as one to tackle these issues that are plaguing the world, including those who have been affected the most, like Pakistan. Thank you very much, Kamran Naeem, Water and Climate Change Specialist at UNICEF, to have joined us in the studios. We hope to see and hear much more from you in the coming days as well, because as you said, the youth is part of this, and we'd like to hear your perspective when they talk on COP28. So we'll bring you back then and on more occasions as well. Thank you very much, Kamran, to have joined us. That was our first story, ladies and gentlemen. Our second story concerns the curious case of Nikhil Gupta, an Indian national accused of trying to hire a hitman to kill an American national, a Sikh leader within the United States of America. What is this case all about? Does it link with what happened to Mr. Nijjar? More in the following report.
India's diplomatic woes continue to pile up as US authorities charge an Indian national with plotting to assassinate a Sikh separatist leader on US soil. The Justice Department said the accused Nikhil Gupta was close to assassinating the Sikh leader on directions of an Indian government official. The Justice Department unsealed murder for hire charges against Nikhil Gupta in connection with his participation in a foiled plot to assassinate a US citizen of Indian origin in New York City. The man allegedly targeted in the killing, Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, is a vocal critic of Indian government and leads a US-based organization that advocates for a separate homeland for Sikhs in Indian Punjab. The US government said Indian government official directing the plan from India worked with Gupta and others based around the world. Gupta, who lives in India, was arrested by authorities in the Czech Republic under US extradition orders. The news comes after the White House said last week it was treating a plot to assassinate a Sikh leader on American soil with utmost seriousness and had raised the issue with the Indian government. The Justice Department further revealed that Gupta was recruited into the assassination plot in May this year. This diplomatic nightmare comes after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in September directly linked New Delhi to the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, also a Sikh leader. The US Justice Department said after Nijjar's killing, Gupta told undercover US officials that there was now no need to wait on killing Gurpatwant Singh. This is Ali Andaz reporting for PTV World.
Now, to discuss more about that, Mahrukh Khan joins us. She's a research fellow with the ISSI. Mahrukh, thank you very much to have joined us. Mahrukh, what kind of questions emanate around the world now that another, espionage plot has been unfoiled again from the West, again from the global North, very near to Canada in the United States of America? Do you think this time the world is going to react and will do the necessary as far as pressurizing India to change its tactics?
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me. I think the biggest question now that everybody would really like to have an answer to is whether, India will face the consequences of such terrorist, acts. And it's not just, earlier this year we heard Canada blaming India along with evidence, of such a terrorist activity. And now US has come up with very clear evidence that India is involved. The Indian government, not just India, anybody, a person from India, but the Indian government, people at the highest level are involved in such activities. And now we really, the biggest question right now in my mind is, will India face the consequences like any other country in the world will?
But will it? I mean, that is a question mark. But do you feel that countries such as the US will, change its relationship status with India? Because India is part of the Asia-Pacific strategy of the US as well. They are very close partners and other different. Do you feel that could run in parallel to these allegations that the US has found against India? Will it work on India on these allegations at the same time as well?
I think there might be some consequences, because if you go through the kind of pressure the Justice Department has released, it's not something that they do, in not looking out for, result, If you go through the pressure, they clearly state the thing that the incident that has happened was not in isolation. And it also matches the timeline of the incident that happened in Canada. So we do see, a person easily can connect the dots that the kind of act that the India is playing throughout, all these countries against people who they characterize as terrorists, whether they're Sikhs or Kashmiris or Muslims or any other minority. So I personally believe, yes, there will be consequences. Expecting anything big to happen between the relations, that kind of like a little too early to, suggest or assume. But
there could be a dent, Mahrukh. There could be a dent because of this serious allegations that came first of all by Canada, wherein the information was also provided by the US intelligence services. Both the countries are part of the Five Eyes. And then this happens in the United States of America in May. India's government says it is investigating and has formed a high-level inquiry committee to address the security concerns highlighted by the US government. What do you make of the statement?
I think in this probably it's, at the moment we see that President Biden has also sent two of his most high-level intelligence heads, including the CIA director and the director for national intelligence. So they need, India needs to pacify the situation itself diplomatically, and these are certain things that every country, including India, would do to pacify. But I think it's a little too early to say, be concrete about what will happen. We need to see how the meetings between the CIA director and the director of intelligence happen in India, how things go, from there. But personally, if you, like I said, go through the press, the language that has been used by the US against India is pretty strong. They are asking for consequences. They are asking for answers. And this is the first time, India is saying that they will form a committee to investigate into it. They could have said it when the incident happened in Canada, but this time they are actually saying that, we will identify people who would look into this. So we will see some kind of, a diplomatic tightrope happening between both the countries.
It's interesting you mentioned Canada, because what happened with Mr. Niger is also something that is out in the front with Justin Trudeau, with Melanie Joly, the Foreign Minister of Canada, openly talking about Indian involvement in the involvement of Indian intelligence agency RAW in the assassination. Despite that, we don't see much developments as that. Has there been any development? Have there been any documentation come in different international media? Nothing. What will happen this time with the US? Is India, in your point of view, ready to face the consequences of using transnational terrorism, or will this also be put under the blanket after some time?
India personally, why would India want to face consequences? That is something. This is something that they've been doing in Pakistan has time and again before. Even all these incidents started happening. Been talking about that India is sponsoring terrorism. India is doing acts that are illegal in nature according to international law. And now, I think interestingly, the things have happened in two very big Western countries. So I don't know why the thing between whatever happened in Canada went under the blanket, but I don't see this incident in particular going under the blanket anytime soon.
All right, Mahrukh, if let's go back to Canada with the Justin Trudeau allegations, and India had denied any role in the killing. Will India, after the formation of any committee to decide or to look into this, also deny this allegation?
No, I don't think so. If they wanted to deny, they could have. Just saying that we will form a committee to look into an incident, it does imply that there is, something going on. There is some fire, to that smoke that's happening. So if they had to, they would have exactly done what they did when the Canadian incident happened with Nijar. This time they haven't declined, they haven't refused. At that time they straightforwardly had. And if you also look at the timeline of the incident, both the incidents, Nijar's killing and this, pretty much match. May, June, July, that's the time frame that we look into. So these are interesting factors that we need to enter, and there's more to read between the lines with all the things that's happening,
I totally understand, Mahrukh, where this is coming from. Does this also vindicate Pakistan's stand that it has been saying since a long time of Indian involvement in transnational terrorism, whether it be in Pakistan? We have one of the Indian spies still under our custody, and other countries that have also raised the same questions. And now the questions come from Canada and the United States of America.
And sorry to cut you, the one with the US, it's not just about an assassination attempt. They are also charging the person for drugs and human trafficking. Those are two very strong, allegations.
So will these allegations pile up and pile on more pressure on India?
Of course. They've already sentenced, they are assuming a sentence of 20 years. So hopefully, yes, it will put India in a very tight position. The government in particular, especially the elections coming up, and the whole foreign policy narrative that the Indian government has been leading. The nationalistic agenda, the BJP becoming more Hindutva in nature. So these will, all this that's been happening globally will pretty much target that kind of ideology that's been instigating in India so far.
Mahrukh, let's talk of the Indian foreign policy narrative and the upcoming election that you've also mentioned, which is interesting because the upcoming elections are also in the United States of America. Is the political scenario in India going to be modified or changed to any extent whatsoever because of these serious implications that are emanating from Canada and the United States of America? What's your take on it?
I think there's a lot of Hindutva fatigue in India as well. While we do understand that this narrative has gone fire in India in past 4 or 5 years, but I think there's a bit of Hindutva fatigue in India as well, where it's now clearly impacting their foreign policy and their image that they've created abroad. So I believe there will be a lot of backlash internally in the government circles. I don't think there will be anything when we talk about the masses, but there will be a lot of backlash internally in the government circles, and we do, it's pretty obvious.
Mahrukh, do you feel the foreign policy is subject to change in India following such allegations, or do you feel India is going to continue going on with the same narrative?
I think that would be naive to assume that the foreign policy in India will change, because their foreign policy, their foreign policy would only change if the US, after this incident, tries to, kind of detach or tries to take a step back with the kind of policies they are taking with India in regards to, the Indo-Pacific or in regards to China or generally. So if that happens, yes, then we might see some kind of foreign policy change in India. Otherwise, independently on its own, it would be kind of naive to assume that India would change its foreign policy without anything.
All right, Mahrukh, I'd also like to understand the Asia-Pacific strategy of the US. Do you feel now the US might be looking at other parallel avenues for its policy to be highlighted apart from India? Do you feel they might look at other options in the near future?
Near future, probably not, but they would try to. I think they would now start looking for other options. Probably not in near future, but in a little longer way down the road, because the kind of watchdog, duties India is okay with performing. I don't think any other country would want to do that.
All right, these allegations that first came out from Canada, now from the US, and both from very, very credible sources.
Yeah.
How does that imply India's role in regional and global politics? Any effect whatsoever?
I think yes. I think these two incidents in particular have really tarnished the kind of image that India was leading of being a big brother, whether we talk about BRICS or in the region. That's really, these all incidents are really catching up to the image that India has created over the years. And it will impact India when it comes to regional politics or, in politics, let's say in the SEO, or recently when we talk about STARC or BRICS, the Indian image might take a bit backlash on these grounds.
All right, let's see how that plays up. Thank you very much, Mahrukh Khan, research fellow at the ISSI, talking to us about this assassination plan of dual nationals, Canadian-American national, that has been unearthed by the American authorities, similar to what happened in Canada, that was also unearthed by the Canadian Prime Minister. Thank you very much, Mahrukh, to have joined us. Let's come to our third story, and that concerns the truce between Israel and Palestine. Another 24 hours have been given for this truce. How is that going to help Palestine or Israel for that matter? What kind of future lies ahead as far as Palestine is concerned, or the people of Palestine or the people of Gaza is concerned? We've been joined by Nour, Odeh, political analyst, who joins us from the West Bank. Nour, thank you very much to have joined us. This extension of the truce for one day, who does it benefit the most?
Thank you for having me. It benefits first and foremost the civilians in Gaza who need desperately to receive humanitarian assistance. As you recall, when Israel began this war on Gaza, it cut off water, electricity, food, and fuel supplies. And so the entire population is on the brink of starvation, and there's more than 1.7 million Palestinians who have been displaced. At least 700,000 of them are children. So the humanitarian needs are simply enormous, and the amount of assistance getting in is very little, and it's limited by Israel. So one more day would allow more aid to flow in and would give humanitarian organizations more time to serve this devastated population.
All right, when you look at the aid, there's a lot of development as far as the aid that has been entering Palestine is concerned. Do you feel this process is going to continue once the truce ends as well? Are you optimistic on that front?
Well, if the fighting, if the Israeli bombardment returns, God forbid, then there's really no guarantee about what will happen. Israel has made its intentions of starving the population very clear. And so the fear is that the amount of aid, which is already far below what is needed, would be further restricted. Israel is only allowing aid to go to cross through the Rafah crossing with Egypt. It has shut down all other commercial crossings. So one would expect, unfortunately, that if the bombardment continues and if there is a ground invasion of southern Gaza, as the Israeli generals have been saying, then the humanitarian situation, which is already at the level of catastrophe, would only deteriorate further.
Noor, you talk of the killings, the catastrophe. More than 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the 7th of October, since this began, and more than 5,000 of those are children. I mean, this is unbelievable in this day and age to even think about the killings of 5,000 plus children in a month or a few weeks' time. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says he doubts Israel is respecting international humanitarian law, calls for an end to indiscriminate killing of civilians. Will the pressure mount on Israel?
One would hope so, yes. I think that we've heard more and more from world leaders in Europe, like Pedro Sanchez, who are saying openly that there is no way that these thousands of civilians have been killed by mistake. And in fact, many investigations, including in Israeli media, have proved that none of these casualties are happening by mistake. Israel knows the Gaza Strip. It is heavily surveilled, and when it orders a strike to wipe out an entire neighborhood that is home to hundreds of people, it understands and it sanctions the murder of those people, the murder of families, the wiping out of entire families. That is now a documented fact, and I think it is becoming increasingly difficult for world leaders, except the US, unfortunately, to openly state that this mass slaughter of Palestinian civilians has to stop. It is inexcusable, it is criminal, and nobody should be giving it cover.
Now let's talk of the United States. Now the US Secretary of State joined a meeting of Israel's war cabinet in Jerusalem. He, in which Netanyahu thanked Mr. Blinken for the country's support amid the war. At the same time, Mr. Blinken also says the truce is producing results and should continue. How important should the role or would the role be of the United States be in the coming days?
Well, the United States has a lot of leverage to exercise. It is Israel's most important ally. It is protecting it on the world stage politically. It is providing it with armament and all the support that it needs politically. And so one would imagine that if the US applies enough pressure for Israel to stop the bombardments, for Israel to engage in more negotiations to secure the release of the Israeli captives, that Israel would oblige. We'll have to wait and see. I think the mediators will continue to work up until the last minute to secure an extension of the ceasefire and perhaps the release also of more Israeli captives. There will be, I'm sure, very difficult discussions about who would be released and in exchange for what. Those will be complex negotiations, but I think the only way, if the objective is to return them home, then the only way to do that safely is through negotiations that are now being mediated quite aptly, I might add, by Qatar and Egypt.
And let's hope for the best, Nour, and we don't know what's going to happen even 24 hours from now. So let's see whether the truce might be extended for a further period or whether there will be talks that will solidify for a ceasefire. One should remain optimistic, but looking at the past, at what has been happening since the 7th of October, we should be cautiously optimistic, to say the least. Thank you very much, Nour Odeh, to have joined us from the West Bank. That was Nour Odeh, political analyst, joining us and discussing, of course, what has been happening in Gaza since the truce began. And of course, a further 24 hours have been given for this truce. Let's see what happens once that period ends. Let's come to our last two stories. Henry Kissinger, who was a very dominating and polarizing force in the US foreign policy, has now passed away at the age of 100. He was a former US Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, who had escaped Nazi Germany in his youth to become one of the most influential and controversial foreign policy figures in US and American history. He has now passed away. He was 100 years old. He was synonymous with US foreign policy in the 70s and also received a Nobel Peace Prize for helping arrange the end of US military involvement in the Vietnam War. Is also credited with secret diplomacy that did help President Richard Nixon's open communist China to the United States and the West, highlighted by Nixon's visit to the country in 1972. Let's come to our last story, and that concerns 6 exoplanets, ladies and gentlemen, that have been discovered in synchronized dance around a star. Now, which is this star? It is a star that is millions of light years away. The 6 planets orbit the bright star HD 110067, that is around 100 light years away from Earth. The star is visible from the northern hemisphere as part of the Coma Berenices constellation. It's very interesting when you look at events such as these, and when you unearth similar things as what we are seeing in our solar system happening in other exosystems across the universe, we can maybe realize and understand how our solar system came into being, and so many other things, so many other question marks that are also surrounding the formation of the solar system and our planet. A lot of interesting discoveries that are being made. We'll be highlighting that as and when they come along. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news stories segments that pertain to us, you in Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.